Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This will be put up on the YouTube channel as part 3 for our diving into Atavism X6 core for Unity. Today we are going to be actually creating the Unity project, putting it into core mode, setting the server into core mode, and kind of just going around and poking at some of that stuff. And hopefully everything goes well and we just get her going. So we'll dive right on in here. So I've already created a new Unity project. Now I haven't put any of the Atavism stuff in here yet, but I've gone ahead and set up, for example, the UMA, the characters, switched everything over to HDRP, added in some of the other assets I'm going to be using early on, and just got those in place so that we weren't waiting on Atavism to do up its thing. So now that basically the whole thing is here, ready to go, we're going to go ahead and put in the Atavism system. And I'm assuming that you've already got to the point where basically you've got a pretty simple establishment of certain things going here. And you've already kind of hopped into the running of the demo version, which in turn means that, for example, you should be able to come in here and start up the servers and everything will just work just fine and dandy and be just fine. You should have already been able to run the demo and everything will work. Now ignore these errors just because the way that my system's set up and whatnot, I'm having some issues with Windows at the moment locking out my ports again. So, yay, lots of fun stuff with that. But, in turn, we're not going to be messing with the server today because I'm having some binding issues, but we will still be doing the database and all that stuff. But with Unity itself, you'll need to import the Atavism core, which is, in my version, it's the 10.6 core. If you're using a different version of Unity, yours will basically have to match with it. You'll download that off your A panel. We'll just put that into our scene. We'll wait for Unity to catch up, and it'll ask us to go ahead and import it. Move that down a little bit so it's easier to see in other windows. Now when this finishes, it's going to ask you if you want to set it up, just like it does in the demo version. It'll ask you to basically set the project up, installing things like the Text Mesh Pro, setting the project settings for the proper color space, adding the scene data to your project for the builds. Pretty much the same setup as you would do with the demo, only it's a smaller file, so it should take a lot less time. The core is very tiny at just under 400 megs versus the full version, which is like, what, 6 gigs? So while this thing's doing its thing, I'll go ahead and just take a peek at that here. So, so while our thingy's doing its thing, in here, this is the one I'm using. Under the A panel, my downloads from Atavism, I'm getting the Unity core. These are basically the ones you're probably used to, the full versions, either divided or not divided. And those are kind of the beefy versions, like 4 to 6 gigs I think it is for all of its data. The other ones that we're going to be using from here is this one for adding in the UMA compatibility. We will be adding in the A-star pathfinding, but we'll be doing that when we actually get into some of the scenes. And we're going to also be putting in the WorldAPI, which is the only real difference between, in a sense, and for some reason I didn't get the pop-up. I'll just make sure you do your setup. Inside the demo version, the WorldAPI is already configured in. In the core version, it's not, so you have to put it in there yourself. So if I go into the same scenes as I would under the demo, and open up, for example, the login, and I look under scripts, and I scroll all the way through here. It's the weather manager. Kind of just digging on through. There's so many files in here. It's always so fun to try to navigate. Then turn in here somewhere is the WorldAPI. And usually it's towards the bottom, but now it's not. Go figure. World Builder, yada yada yada. Oh well, either way, it'll be under your script somewhere. I just don't feel like looking for it right now. But there is a WorldAPI script that will say it's been removed. And you basically just want to go in there and enable it once you put in the proper assets for it. We are going to kind of get some of this stuff more manageable so it's easier to navigate. Okay, makes it so much easier when you can actually see what's going on. Okay, so the next piece we're going to put in here will be the WorldAPI. Go ahead and import all of that. Let's twiddle our thumbs and wait on all this fun stuff to finish. Now the WorldAPI is in. Now in this case I could see it popped up in here. We have the World Manager and it's set to removed. It's because it's not enabled in the core version. Now if you come under the Atavism setups, and you pull up, for example, the editor, and you kind of, wow, that's a big screen. Kind of shrink that. If you look around in, for example, the integrations, it's not in here because it's not part of an actual integration. It's just basically how it stores your data, so you really can't set it up from in here. You'd have to kind of set it up elsewhere. All this data here was the same as with the demo. It's pulling it from the editor, so you don't have to mess with any of that stuff to get any of this stuff working with core. So there's nothing in here we really need to mess with. But to get the WorldAPI in, if you find your World Manager, you click on the three little dots next to it. It says it's a removed component and you just want to revert it. I will put in the script for the system that we just put in for the WorldAPI, and now your system is running ready for the WAPI. So that's all you have to do to get the WAPI ready to go out of core. Now the next one that we're going to install will be the UMA, so that we have access to the UMA system in Atavism for things like the character creations, as well as our NPCs, whatever we choose to use the UMA for. We're going to just import it all, though we're basically just going to turn around and delete part of it. But I'm going to show you how to delete it if you installed it all. So normally when I'm installing stuff, I quite often need to limit them, but I'll still just go through and install everything on accident on a few of them. So it's kind of useful to know how to clean it up, especially inside of UMA, where, for example, this right now is going to install the human DCSs and orc DCS files, as well as some outfits and everything for the Atavism demo system. We don't want that in here. We've got our own human races and everything else, so it's kind of not needed to be in here. So if we come under the UMA, under the global library, it'll open up this, and we just need to rebuild the database. So we rebuild from the project, including all the text files, and this will put in all of our happy stuff. And if we look, the DCS stuff is the stuff we don't want. These are the ones I've already created. So if we ping this, it'll open up the Dragon Saying, Atavism objects, UMA content, and we just want to get rid of that whole thing. This will get rid of the armor, the hairstyles, the orc races, and all the stuff that just doesn't exist for us. It doesn't do us any good, so we're just going to get rid of them. So we'll just delete out those folders, and then we're just going to rebuild from here to clean it up. And now that race data is gone. So we're not wasting space on it. Whenever you have assets that you are not using, like in that case the orc race file, since I'm not planning on using them, it's a good idea to remove them from your project so it's not being compiled in. Later on, when we switch this over to an addressable system, it's not building addressable files for things that you're not using. You're just saving yourself a lot of headache. So right now, as it stands, Unity is ready to go for Atavism Core. There's literally nothing else we need to really do with it. If we come under the Dragon Sand system and we look at our scenes, we have all the same scenes as with the demo. The difference is these are all empty. So if you're used to, for example, the big open world that you used to get with the demo version, we now just have a square. And right now it's pink because I haven't converted over all the materials, so while I'm explaining all that, I guess I'll go ahead and do that. Again, this is all running in HDRP, so just let that do up its thing. Now, in the demo version, it includes the buildings, the trees, the rocks, and everything else. In the core version, it includes absolutely nothing, but it still comes with a main world so that you have a way to log in and basically start creating your game and seeing how things interact. Just understand that there's nothing here. It's literally a plane. That's your entire world. And you can see it up there in the top corner. There is no terrain data. But in our hierarchy in our main world, it's a panel. That's the background part there is just a panel. It's not a terrain data. There's nothing here at all. And you can see nothing's there. We don't have the water. We don't have the mountains. We have just an empty field. So it's a nice clean slate. But this is also going to get us in a little bit of a problem. Because if we try to run this right now, our screen is just going to be bloated with errors because we're still running the demo version on the server. The demo is basically going to log you in, and it's going to tell the client to go ahead and, for example, load the NPCs, the mobs, the resource nodes that doesn't exist inside of the core. So we need to fix that. So if we want to switch our system over to work under core, it's more than just setting up the basic projects inside of Unity, but to also inform the server what mode it needs to be running in. That's literally editing one file, or you can actually do it from inside the editor itself. In my case, I'm just going to use the file. So if we go under wherever you installed the Atavism Manager, this program here, the Atavism Windows Manager, the folder that you installed it to, if you open that up in your file system here, this is all the stuff to do with that manager. Now, if you don't see all of these files, it's because you haven't actually installed the server yet. Once you've installed the server, it's going to add in, for example, all these files, this folder, these files, all that stuff's going to get added in once you add in the actual install. So if you're missing any of these, just install it. To install it, you just click the three dots, take it to the server file, and install it, and you're good to go. But in here, we just have to do a little bit of work to get this taken care of. And I do not know why all of a sudden my phone is just going nuts with messages. But if you start up your database, which is running because it's green, and right now because Windows is still bound all my ports, it shows everything else is running even though it's not. I'll fix that later. But the database is running. We can get into it. We could do up our stuff with it. And that's what we need. we need to edit the database. The server settings don't change from one system to another. All of the stuff basically is identical from one system into the other system for pretty much everything. Now this is a demo build. So if, for example, I look at the items, it's got all the default items that comes with the system, but you'll start to see the problem. Half of these don't have icons anymore. And that's because this is getting these icons from the project file. But the project file doesn't include all that extra stuff. So a lot of it is now just a bunch of blank stuff. We've got just tons and tons of missing icons. Nothing matches up here. But those are those. We've still got our crafting recipes, your item sets, your initial characters. You've literally got all the stuff from the demo. All your skills. We don't need this because we're trying to create a core, and it's going to, for example, try to access all these files. If we try to pull up any of these, we'll see these things just don't exist. Half of the icons don't exist. The mob data doesn't exist. For example, if we pop in here, a bomber bug, we try to open it up. It's trying to load up the resources, mobs, SF Bay, bomber bug, 01 prefab. Does that even exist for us? So if we come in here and look under the resources, no, we don't even have that folder. So when it's trying to turn around and tell the client to load those files, Unity's just going to start spitting out errors saying you're telling me to do stuff that I can't do. This data doesn't exist. I don't have that folder. I don't have those files. It doesn't exist. I can't do it. And then you'll just start getting rows and rows of repeating errors in here while the server's trying to tell the client to do something it just can't do. So to switch this, we have two ways of doing it. The first way we could do from inside the editor. If we come under the server, database actions, we can come down here to the custom forms, and we can actually import our own query commands and everything else. We could do all of our stuff from in here. We could basically just open up the SQL file, paste it all in here, and update it that way. I don't like doing it that way, mostly because these things are limited to how big they can be, and especially if you're coming out of, for example, the demo, you know how big those SQL files can be. So in this case, the demo data is 9 megs worth of a database just for all that extra stuff that we don't have. If you compare it into the core version, it's a heck of a lot smaller. So we could probably fit all those in there. I just don't like executing them this way. I prefer to have the database do it itself. This way everything gets nice, clean, and purged out of there. But you can do all your stuff from in here, including your backups and everything else. Do notice that when you execute these things, you are going to delete everything out of this database. None of this data is going to exist anymore. So if there's anything you need to back up, be sure to back it up now, like hitting that little backup button, before you go wiping it out. Once it's gone for good. We need to set it to not use this data, but to use this data instead. And it's literally one file we have to touch. If we come under the Atavism manager, that is where we install the manager, this program to. We see the DB install 1. If we edit that in Windows 11, you go under Show More Options, and you go into Edit. This is what it's defaulting into. It's installing the new install data with the demo, which, if we remember, is what existed under the server, under SQL. Those are the folders of the data that it's going to try to use. These are all the different types you're able to utilize. That's the one it's defaulting to, that's the one we want. So we want to change the with demo data to a core. And now that should match up our folder in here. So new install core, new install core. This is going to basically tell the MySQL system to log in as the administrative account and install these databases into it. Exit, we'll save it, and then we just run it. And this is going to make up a pop-up, and that pop-up is basically going to go through and do up its thing. So we just run it. Now if you have this run, the editor running in the background, it's likely going to start popping up errors just because we're purging all the data while it's still active. So yeah, sometimes it'll pop up a bunch of errors, but either way, all the data is already loaded up. So if we look at this, it still shows all the default stuff because it's already queried all the data out of the database. We don't want this old data, we want the new, so we just want to exit out of that and rerun it. Now if we come into it and get it from a fresh pull from the database, well, that sucks because we have no mobs, all the characters are back to the default, all the items are now gone in the wind, everything is now vaporized, history no longer existing, which is what we want. But it's bad if you didn't back up your stuff and there was anything important in there. But this is now a core build. Everything starts from zero. There's no items, there's no fillers, there's no buildings, there's no resource nodes, there's absolutely nothing in here. All the coordinated effects, everything's pretty much just gone. Which is going to stop most of the errors that Unity will pass saying, hey, you're trying to load these objects, it doesn't exist, no object references, yada yada yada, because the data is not there and we're no longer telling it to load it. So now the server is set up to run in core mode, and Unity itself is set up to run in core mode. And I'm going to see if Windows is going to be nice to me this time and not make me force a reboot to clean up its actions. More than likely, holy crap, all a good reason nothing works inside of Windows. I have 32 gigs of RAM and one Windows file is using 64 gigs. Congratulations, Windows. I hate Windows. Alright, so give me a minute while I try to convince Windows to close these annoying wastes that it's just trying to terrorize my computer with here. Yeah, my screen's just bouncing all over the place. Ugh. Gotta get this so we can see when it actually clears. And if you would stop bouncing around, that would be very nice. Yeesh. When Windows makes software, they go out of their way to ensure they make it as ignorant and complicated as possible. Just give me a minute here. I might just have to say heck with it and do a reboot because it won't leave the screen in one place for me to actually click on anything. Alright, so come in there. And it's literally got 9,000 copies of one program, and it's a Windows service, so it's just, wow. No wonder I never get anything done inside of Windows. It literally is just gobbling up everything it's got. That last update was an absolute brutal. Alright. So hopefully that all worked. Doubt it, but we'll see. If we run these, it should all be not running, and hopefully it will let me run it and not complain that the addresses are already bound. And it's trying. Don't mind all these errors because I'm using a different Java version. And they're basically just saying that the xverify command and no verifies are basically obsolete. Well, we just see if it fires up, and then to make sure, I'm going to check my logs. It should come up as empty. Yeah, it shows that there's nothing in there, so no errors this time. Alright, so yeah, that cleared it out. Windows being a butthead and just gobbling up everything. So if we come into our, well, first we gotta copy our stuff over. So if I come under the Dragon Sam scenes, I'm going to copy the things we're going to be having into my regular scenes folder so it's easier for me to navigate. I'm just going to dump them in there. I'm going to take the UMA core scene and I'm going to put it in there too. And then I'll just load these up from here. Put you back in because I forgot to save it. Okay. And then just to make sure it saves and I don't forget it again, I'll save it. Yay. Now if we run this, we should pretty much be able to connect to our system as it is. And now we should be running in a complete core version. So if I come in here, I'm a test user. Can't create, I should be able to log in. Of course, if I set my stuff up right. And now we are officially connected into the core edition. Now, absolutely nothing's going to work because we did not set up the UMA prefabs and all that stuff, but we can see that our character creator does work, and it's not really what I would consider a very good human. But hey, we can go ahead and hop into our game right now, and there's all of our stuff. Yay, I can connect in that plain flat world that we were looking at. We now have the plain flat world that we can come in and play with. Can't really do a whole heck of a lot, but hey, we've got ourselves a little thing here. Can jump around, and we've now got our server running into core. Nothing fancy, nothing special, but yeah. If you're wondering why we've got these white icons down here, it's because for some reason in the Atavism core they didn't put in all the icons for all those things. They're actually in the demo asset still. So you will still have to assign some icons for some of the stuff. But we do have our character, all our stuff exists, but we're still getting errors. If we hop in here, one, we're getting the errors from the character creator, basically complaining human male non-UMA is what it had to use because there was no prefab for that race, but that's fine. We're also getting errors about textures not being there, and storage doesn't contain an inventory for currency definition ID 4. What the heck is all that? Well, if we look at our normal stuff, so if we look under, not there, but we want our inventory. Usually down in the demo you got these little currency boxes down here, and you've also got your premium currencies up here, but these haven't been defined in the core. So if we look at the core here and we go under the server options and we look at the currencies, there's only one in here. But if you remember from the demo, there was 4. There was the premium currency up here, and then you had your gold, silver, and bronze or whatever it was that you used to have for your coins down here, but now none of those are defined, so it has no idea what nothing is. That's what that error is. It's nothing to worry about. You just gotta set that up. And then when you do set it up, you've got to be sure to edit your UIs to not pull data that doesn't exist. So there's that part, but we've already created a very big problem. This problem comes to the demo is still partially running. And with that, what do I mean? Well, you notice how most games, websites, and everything else, when you go to do your login, there's always options, for example, for recovering your password, resetting it, reporting problems and all. Well, that doesn't exist here. And that's because when Dragon Sand made the demo version for Atavism, they wanted it to be as easy for you as possible to get it started. Not necessarily the way it's supposed to be, but in turn, instead of saying, yeah, well, before you can run this, you need to create a user authentication systems and the databases for it and the servers for it, they just embedded a kind of generic placeholder for it inside the Atavism system. Nothing you want to keep. One of the main reasons you don't want to keep it is you really can't use it in the end. So if we exit out of here, and if I pop into one of my screens here, give me a second, I'll bring this over to that scene. I gotta start up that server. Now the problem we're going to run into, if I bring this over here, now this is the Atavism's core database. Now I can look through here, I can find a lot of the information. There's all my accounts, my account informations, my characters, but we can't really come in here and do anything with this. And one of the biggest problems that we have is the passwords. We can't change the passwords. We can't reset the passwords. Everything that in turn is in here is literally it. That's all there is to it. So if we look under, for example, our account here, that's our password. I can assure you that is not what I typed in there. To make it sort of work, they're using a sort of internal salting hashing system just to make the whole system halfway function. But this is something we can't use. We can't reset this password. If a user comes in and plays and then says, hey, I forgot my password, we can't do nothing with it. The only thing we can basically tell them is, well, delete your account, start a new account, or I'll delete your account from in here, and then you guys got to make up a new account, and we'll have to manually transfer everything over. That sounds like an awful big pain in the rear end to me. We don't want that. Now, because we don't want that, we want to use, in turn, the actual system for it. And with Atavism, it's already set up for this. You just basically need to put it in and tell it to go ahead and use it. Now, in Atavism, it's called the Remote PHP Account Connector, which is this. If you pop over to the Atavism's wiki, under the Remote PHP Account Connector, this is basically telling you how you're supposed to connect the system. And it basically comes through and tells you all the basic information about how it internally works and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons you need to do this is, say, for example, you have a subscription plan, and say, for example, your user account didn't pay for their subscription. Well, you'll notice there was no option for any of that stuff inside of the screen here. There's nowhere in here to enter in your payment information, or to log into your website account, or to pay for your subscription, or to activate any keys for time or anything else. It's just a bare bone basic system. So you need it to use an actual authentication system so that you can actually do something. Now if you look in here, it's basically giving you a kind of how to implement it into a generic website. These commands do not work anymore. They have not updated the wiki. If I try to run a MySQL command inside of PHP, it will fail. MySQL commands are basically just completely obsolete. Now if I run, just hop in here, I'll make up a new folder or a new file, and I'm just going to run that as it is. I'm just going to copy it as they tell me I should be able to run it. And if I save that into my web server, under here, htdocs, we'll just call this. Now if I try to open that, it'll basically just tell me that I can't run it. That's an undefined function. MySQL is not part of a valid system anymore. It's still a valid system. MySQL still very much exists, but you no longer use this. This is obsolete, depreciated, however you want to look at it. Now most of the systems use what's called a MySQLi. Now if I pull up an example of how it's supposed to look, let's look at this. So inside of here, it's still doing the MySQL stuff, but now it's MySQLi files instead of MySQL. Now this is a generic login registration form that we've got for some of our stuff. And we're going to be using something like this later on, but for now we just want to skip it and use a sort of a placeholder. And that's what I got this for. In turn, if I look at my login data for Atavism right now, all this runs through the Atavism server under test user. We can see that under the database. Test user is the username. That's basically all of our stuff. Unfortunately, it doesn't do us any good because, yeah, I don't want that. And we can't change anything or manipulate anything. So we want this system to work. We're going to make our own system later on with the updated codes, but for right now we just need a placeholder, something that we can use. And to validate that it's going to go properly, we can look at this right here. I have an ID of 15. We're going to use a different number. Now in here it tells you how to enable it. And that's literally all you have to do to the Atavism side to turn the system on. It's already ready to go with it. It just needs you to basically tell, okay, don't use the demo version, use a real system. For it, all you've got to do is go under that system, which if we scroll into it, it'll basically tell you where all the files are at. Go to your Atavism server, binary directory, and you're going to put this under the authserver.py. So just like before, we go into our Atavism manager, into the server, we're going to pop into the bin, and there's our authserver.py file. We're just going to open that, and we're going to just look for those little markings that it had. So if we look at it, it's telling us we need to turn on a connector, the connector.setURL, and the EMS set remote connector. Well, look at that. They're right there. So all we got to do is come in here and take out this one, change out one of these. In my case, I'm going to take out this one because this is already set to the local host. And then I'm just going to turn on the ms.set remote connector to our new connector. I then just save this file, and now our server is ready to go for the actual system. If I stop this, are you going to release my ports, or are you going to keep them locked out on me? More than likely you'll keep them locked out just because you're Windows and you like to be a royal pain in my butt. And of course it didn't shut them down, so I'm going to do it by hand again. I love Windows. No, actually I completely hate Windows, and this is why I usually do everything inside of Linux. Give me a minute while I go back through and terminate all this junk again that Microsoft decides it has to break. It's so much fun. But in turn, when I'm done closing off all this stuff, I'll be able to rerun the server, and in turn that will allow all of the stuff to basically do up its thing like normal. The system will still function as it is, with or without doing this, but you're better off to just get things in place ahead of time rather than waiting until you're ready to actually start implementing all the stuff and then trying to convert halfway through a development. Especially when you end up with all of the hundreds of thousands of user accounts and items of risk conflict. Just set it up ahead of time and it'll save you a lot of hassle. So we're just going to wait for this, and I'm going to make sure I don't log in with a real one that I have already set up here. Under this, test user, okay. Give me a moment here and I'll show how all that works. done. Now if we come into here and I try to log in, we can't get in. And this is because that user no longer exists. If I try to log in with another user, it'll still tell me I can't get in. Well, I wonder why. What could possibly be up with this? Well, let's eyeball what's going on here. So with the server running, if we look at the setup here, we hop into the auth server. This is sending our login data here. verify_acc.php, which is the file that we're editing here. Now let's just take all this out and we're just going to do up a blank system. Now Atavism is going to send two variables over here. It is going to send the username and the password because that's the only information that it has. But it's not going to send the username as username, but as user. For us to get that information, we basically have to look at our stuff. So if we open up an example of our login script here. Now this is a system that works just fine like normal on all of our other stuff here. This is how we would normally pull it. You set up a definition and you pull in the information. This is being set up by Atavism. It's basically filling out a form, sending the form over here, and it works just like a HTTP form. There's nothing fancy or special to it. Now, if we take this, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't because of the trim command. But if I take this, it's passing a variable called user. With that, if that user and then we're just going to do up another one here for a fake second user. That. When we save this, we run it, and see if that works. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a very bad sudden cold here, and it's still not all that wonderful. But if we look at this and we try to change your stuff over, cannot connect to the authentication server. Well, I wonder why. What could possibly be the thing? Are we getting an error in the actual script itself? If I pop into here, and in this case, it is. It's saying something doesn't exist in there. It's saying it can't pull the user data. So let's take a peek at this, and well, where are we getting it from? We're getting it from the post user. Now if we look in there and we look at this stuff, it's how it's basically being sent is it's coming in from a post command, but it doesn't sort of work our way. So again, it's not sending us a username, it's sending us the other stuff. But if we look at the error, it's saying that that error comes from line 3, which in turn is telling us off the bat it's not able to pull the post data like this. So let's try it without the trim and see if that gets us anywhere. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just a server thingy, and different servers communicate different ways, so you gotta fight with it. But that also doesn't work. But we can't register because that just doesn't work. But can we try something else? It might just be setting this into a lowercase, which could theoretically be the situation. So maybe we just need to set this to lowercase. Test user 1. Well, what about that? Does that work? We hop on in there, we run it, and it still doesn't work. This can be what sets you into all kinds of problems early on, is just trying to get these types of things to function. They're not really hard per se, it's just sometimes tedious, we'll say. Now, if I look into here, one of the things that I usually have that's a problem with this is this one here. If I turn on the set post, sometimes this fixes it. So we're just going to try that, and since we changed the server settings, oh Lord, I got to do all that killing of those things all over again. Oh, I hate Windows. I think the next time I do up a video on this, it'll be on the Linux box, because this is just getting ridiculous. Spend more time closing out the dead Windows apps that it just keeps recreating every time I bind a port. And then I spend 20 minutes to close it for a 1-minute run, to spend another 20 minutes to close them all over again, and I hate Windows. I don't know, I'm starting to really think that they just hire monkeys to do all their work. They have no logic in the way that they work. They clearly don't test anything before they put it out the door. We just wait on all this stuff to run again. Yay. We wait for the success message. Done. Now, does the authentication work? Probably still not. We still cannot connect to the authentication server, and it's not giving us any kind of an actual error, really. So let's just pop back into here. Well, let's just take you out. Why am I returning? That could be a good reason. I'm using the wrong commands here. Well, that could be a complete I'm an idiot kind of thing. Yeah, of course, it's just me being an idiot. Sorry about that. My brain's fried. It is 9 o'clock, and I've been up since 2 o'clock hacking my brains out. So basically the problem was me being an idiot. I'm used to coding in C# and stuff. It's been a while since I actually did PHP stuff. But basically you're not returning the errors, because I was just doing stuff inside of the Aegis, which is Java, which you return all the codes. Here you're echoing it because you're echoing to the HTML output. But in turn with this, I am simply asking for the username to be test user 1. If so, I'm returning the number 10. This is all that Atavism expects. If I come in here and pass something invalid, then I would return a different number. Say, for example, echo, we'll just set that to -2. Now if I come back under here, and I give it a fake user, there's my error code. In this case, I'm just throwing error codes in there, error 2. So if we look at the PHP system, it tells you what the basic codes are. Now at the bottom, if I return a -1, it'll tell me that my login was invalid. -2, my account is banned. -3, no access. So in our case, if we supply invalid information, we would normally return a 1. In this case, we're not going to, just because we're the only ones logging into it. So it doesn't really matter what our code is, but we just want it to return something so that we see what the problem is. Nobody else will see it, and until we actually create a registration system, this doesn't work. Nothing else works with it. Now, with that, our system there is in place. So Atavism now works, and if we come in here And to validate that we're not using the Atavism system, one, you'll see I didn't register this new account. I'll just do a 2 here. Nope, I gotta change the other one's case. Give me a minute here. And back into here. Look. Like literally was just working and then I turned it right around and I broke it. I am so good at breaking things. Let's take that setup out because I'm not returning it and that's the problem. Okay, so in here, if I hop in here, I'm going to go ahead and create another fake account. Well, fake character. Do up whatever. Log in. Now, we're not using the Atavism's system at all for this very handsome looking pill. I'll just call him Mr. Pill. If we go back under our database system and we look at our database, nothing's going to change in here. We've got our new user, but you notice I didn't register that user. It's still got its password, it's still got its stuff, but you'll notice normally these numbers increase. So it started my first character off with an ID of 15. And here I told my ID was 10. So if I tell it I'm 15, which was our original, then I should log into the old character instead of this one. And that in turn is how the system basically functions with it. Now I can go through and reset my passwords and everything else. Atavism's only storing, in a sense, the temporary data. This password isn't in turn the actual password. You can consider this more along the lines of my little token. When I go through and log out and do my things and have at it and I log back in, I can supply it any password I want. The password does not matter to that one bit. And if I look at this, you'll see my stuff doesn't change in here one bit. If I change my password, it doesn't matter because this isn't using its own internal password system. So, for example, here, that's a heck of a lot longer than it was before, and it still lets me log in. Atavism's no longer handling the user authentication. It's literally handed that information over to our other system. I still have all the same access to do all the same stuff I would normally do, but I can now do different things with it. And one that I want to do, if I get out of here and I come under my accounts, I've got my two little users here. Test user is the one I want to change here. I am now an admin. I am now the big boss of the whole world and I run the show. Now the next time I would basically redo my stuff, I can log in and I'll have the admin panel. So altogether, that's the basics of in turn getting into core mode. You have to install the packages that are necessary, the Atavism core module for the Unity. You don't need to, but I would strongly suggest you put in the WorldAPI. It'll make integrations with a lot of different things easier later on. And in our case, since we're using the UMA, you still use the same UMA add-on that you would in the demo version. We had to go through and set our database configurations over to going into core. So all we did was change these variables over to load up the core version. We executed that file. That file then purged our database and put it all in there. We've also went through and set up the PHP Remote authentication, which is basically not a real system at the moment because we don't have an actual authentication. But this will allow us to make whatever users enter whatever credentials we want. We're not even paying any attention to the password. we went ahead and set up the authentication server to go ahead and manage that system. And you'll notice here where I did change this. Honestly, this is one of those you're going to kind of have to play with depending on your server. Usually I don't need it on because I'm running Apache, and usually Apache is good with it. But some web servers, I can't tell you any in particular because I haven't really messed with a whole lot of them, but they basically handle post data differently. And so in some cases you'll have to actually set your variables in a different method. And that's basically what that's for. In here you've got your happy little key. This is honestly, for the time being, we'll get into setting up the keys and stuff later. That is part of the salting, hashing of the data. You don't want to leave this the default because then anybody who uses Atavism basically has your master key. Needless to say, it's not what you kind of want. And you've basically just got your stuff. This is basically how it's doing its internal stuff. So if we were to take this ginormous freaking code here, that's basically, you can look at it like the salt for its encryption. We're not technically relying on that just because we're using our own authentication system anyways, so it doesn't really bother us too much. But one thing we are going to be utilizing later on, once we put this onto a live server, is we want SSL. And with the SSL, the data will be encrypted going back and forth, and that's definitely an essential thing, and that's definitely a useful thing for us to have. Now, one of the things I was asked about the other day, somebody had private messaged me about one of the last videos, I think it was the second video we did on the kind of summary of the Aegis system, and I will try to pull it up for them. Eclipse. I was asked about how, in a sense, these things do database. Because it was brought up that things are not where they should be and they're having problems actually accessing the database and all that sort of fun stuff. But if you wait for all this stuff to load, waiting on the checks, if you look into the actual systems, so it's like here's our remote authentication system and how it's working. So this is where we'll come in and set up, for example, all those little key values and all that stuff that it was referencing here. -1, -2, -3, those are all defined right there. So if you want to add more, by all means, this is where you can add all the codes that you want. So this is a system that basically handles that. But that's not what we're after. We're after this one. Now, well, no, that's just a regular database authentication stuff. But in turn, these are database calls and all that stuff. Underneath the database system, this can really get confusing just because they're not where you think they're supposed to be. So if, for example, if we look at the database, some of the stuff is stuff that I've added in, so don't strain yourself on that. But by default, Atavism comes with 4 databases: admin, Atavism, master, and the world content. The rest of it's basically just stuff I put in. Now, world content stores a lot of the stuff. Bits and pieces kind of get dabbled around in different places. For example, in the admin system is where you might find a lot of the stuff for your guilds, which off the bat doesn't make a lot of sense why the guild is part of an admin, but it's just ways that they organize out their stuff. But if you can go through the database, which in my case I use a PHP MyAdmin to come in here and kind of poke at all this stuff and see where all the stuff is at. But in turn, inside of here, if I could find the data that I want, that's the system that I need to access. So in this case, if I need some information out of the admin database, for example, I want to mess with the guild data. Inside of Eclipse, I look in here, there's all the queries for the admin stuff. This is how it handles all that stuff. Most of this information is set up inside the actual plugins, but sometimes you might need specific info, especially in our case where we're going to be getting into an advanced skilling system. We don't even have a database. We're not going to be using the existing skill database that's in there or any of that data. This is where you can kind of see how it parses the stuff and then where certain pieces are at. And then if you actually go into the stuff, you can actually pull the real stuff. So it's like here, the mob data isn't actually in the mob data. There is no system for that. This is inside of another system, which I believe all the mob data goes into the world database. But in turn, you're just looking through those things, and then you'll generally hop into the plugins, and from there you're basically going to load up your stuff. So if we look at, for example, the guilds, under the guild client, we kind of poke around in here a bit. This is some of the data that's going to be handling its stuff, and you can kind of just eyeball in here on getting it. But most of the time you don't need to mess with this, and this is something I want to point out because this can be extremely overbearing, we'll say, especially at the start. This is a lot to try to take in. This is a lot of stuff, and don't think that you've got to just all out come in here and play with these things. One thing that you have to understand is that Atavism tried to be as nice as they can with a lot of their stuff, and there's an easier way to access a lot of the stuff without directly manipulating this. And there's an example all over the place inside of Atavism itself. So if, for example, I come into the scenes and I look at the main world, let's say, for example, I want some way to access my skill information for my character. How could I just directly connect to that without going through and creating all these weird little messaging systems and hooks and implementations and filters and setting up the message proxy servers and all that mess? How can I get anything out of this? Well, it's called an API, and it's already there. So if you come in here and we want we want the advanced editing. You come under the client API. Now, given I don't like their implementations on these things, they are kind of hard to navigate. But these are all the calls that you could basically make from your client to get all kinds of information. So I want information from here. There's all my abilities. This is all the stuff I could do without touching Aegis. These are just commands that already exist. And I could just come in here and pull whatever it is I want. As an example on those, let's take your skills. Now, inside the panel, assuming we're looking at it from the right position here. Wow, that light is annoying. Now, if you remember inside the actual client, you have the skills button where you can come in there and look at your skill information. Well, how is it getting your information? Well, why not just look at how it gets it? Half the time you don't need to make your own calls and everything to actually navigate the stuff. You kind of just gotta find your way through it, which can be quite confusing because some of the stuff is not very well named. But quite often I just kind of cheat and go in there and do that. Now click on one, open it up. Hey, there's my skill info. Well, there's my skill window, and then I'll just come in here and close out the rest of them. Now clean up my screen a little bit, make it a little bit easier to navigate. Okay, so with that then, this shows me my talents. Well, not really after the talents, but that gets me into the right area. There's my skill window, skill points for the talents. But these are all of the different systems. Now, if I find one that is for the actual skills system, craft skills, those are the prefabs. We open up that. Where are you? You're under the spells. Well, I could just use one of these, I'm sure. Just turn this one here on. We'll turn off the other one. Make it easier to navigate with fewer windows. Now this is basically the panel you would normally get when you click on the little icon down here to open up your skills. How does this parse it? Because when you're inside the game, this shows you all of your skill stuff. And to make it even easier to navigate it, you can just run it from the client itself. I'll show you that, just usually how I find it. I don't know why I'm trying to make it more complicated looking through the UI. But if I come in here, I log my little happy character in and I go into my main screen. All I got to do is open up the panel that already has access to the data I'm looking for. So, no, well, yes, this is the one I want. So if I come out of here, I look at my scene view, I open up my canvas, you'll notice all the other stuff is now closed. Just my little window here is open, and that's all that I really care about. So I can move around, find my little stuff here, but if I open up the canvas, I'll now be able to see that information out of it. It's not that one. It's always so hard to navigate in here when you're so tired, it's ridiculous. You really just need to start going to bed. But in here is basically all of your components. You can look at your chat systems and all that stuff like normal. But in turn, this is how you would go through and actually kind of mimic the system without actually needing to mimic the system. So if I come into here and I look at my skill system, from in here what's open, I can see all these gargantuan tons of systems that are functioning, but most of them just doesn't do me any good because we're not actually using them. But this is for our skill points, and we're looking for, I think it was the spells. Let's take that one. So there's the window that's currently open. Now if we look at one of those buttons and we scroll on through and find the buttons and Mr. Tab button 1 here. Now if we kind of look at these, they're all doing different things, but this is where the stuff is located. So if I open this script, it takes me into here, and there's my skills window. If I click on it, there's it. This is how you can access all the stuff without Aegis. You do not need Aegis to access everything. You only need to mess with Aegis, the messages, and all that stuff if you're trying to change the system. If you're just trying to gain access to the information, say you're wanting to change the UI, and I want my skill systems laid out differently, which we'll be doing later on because there's going to be a lot more categories to them and everything. But as soon as this is done loading, bring this over here. This is basically what's running that window, and it's controlling all of the data. Now this is where the fun stuff starts. That's literally how easy it is to pull all the information about your skills. That one itty bitty little command. I'm going to make up my own skill system, and I want you to basically give me from the instance all the player skills, their values, and then just run through them and sort out which types. In this case, type 1 would be the first window, and so on and so forth, and they just kind of go through and set themselves up. But this is basically how it's organizing all the stuff. You'll see it's all coming out of that skills.instance.playerskills, and that's everything. Literally, the data is already synchronized with the client. You just have to tell it what information you want out of the Atavism system. And these are basically just things that link all the stuff so you can figure out what it is. No, I'm not updating. Every time I update anything in Windows, it explodes and the world explodes with it. Just make sure that whenever you are doing it, try to reference them inside of here, I would say, so that you're not using your own Atavism systems and everything else. You're trying to keep everything as separated as you can. But gaining access to the information without actually going into Aegis or database queries or any of that stuff, you just call the functions for it. These are basically setting up all the skills. It's making a local container called skill, and it's going to just pull all the data from the instance about your player skills in there. Anything that you want is basically stored inside of here. You just have to basically figure out what data you want and then search for it. Just come up here and I want to know, I don't know, the time. I can pull it up, type in the time, and if I want something to do with the time, well, there's the time manager. What can I call to it? There's the objects fields. There's the things that it has. There's all your stuff. So I can look at the methods here, and this basically gives you an idea of how to call it. I kind of wish that they would have put in more little examples for people, because a lot of people, this is really not what you're used to. It can get very, very frustrating and overwhelming. But these are just API calls. You don't need specific messages or packets or handshakes or any of that stuff to use these things. You just call the method. It's nothing fancy or special, and it's pretty easy to handle for a lot of the stuff. Now, if we look at our example that it's given us here with the player skills.values, skills.instance, well, those are all part of the Atavism system. We got our Atavism API, and these are just things that you're able to kind of pull, but you can basically just search for those terms inside the API search. That one doesn't work because it's basically a reference inside of itself. This one will give you information about the actual instance, and this will kind of give you your stuff. So if you're looking in here, it's getting from instance.playerskills, is this the same one? Well, these are the possible fields. There's the possible methods, but no, this is not it. And the reason for it is this is the actual instance itself, whereas this instance that it's referring to is the instance in the client itself, not the global. But if we just keep searching around in here, you'll find all of your stuff. There's skills data, there's literally everything in here. You just got to look at your stuff. So I can come in here and pull all of the information about all of my skills just off these calls. You do not need Aegis to do everything. We're still going to get into Aegis because it is definitely one of those things. This is very overwhelming. This is very confusing, but it's also extremely important to learn how the system works. If you skip through these things and you don't understand how Aegis works, and after you've had your system out for a month or two and you think everything's fine and dandy and you're happy with it, and then a user calls up and says, hey, I got a bug. Well, are you just going to basically rely on the Discord to solve it? Or could you come in here and figure out what broke? Did you mess something up with one of your variables? Is something wrong in the database? How could you figure out what caused the problem so that you can then figure out how to fix it? You don't need to know all of this by no means, but it does help to understand how the system works, knowing when it's using TCPs versus UDPs, what the heck the difference between the two are, whether you're pulling information out of a database or whether you're pulling it out of the memory of what's already been pulled out of the database, which is a very important thing, and so on and so forth. So the next episode, this was already a lot longer than I had figured, but I'm tired and I was making stupid mistakes, so I do apologize for that. But in turn, the next one we're going to actually be setting up the character creator so that we can actually use the UMA characters inside of here. We're going to show how the organizations work on that, how it populates the data, how to process and determine the orders that it's going to do things in and all that sort of stuff. And we might do the animation system. We might not. I don't know. Kind of just depends how in depth we do the character creation stuff. But I'm going to kind of be bouncing around some of the different components and kind of just see where we go. I don't really have plans for these things. I kind of just sit down and say this is what I'm currently working on, or what I was working on, or what was brought up to me in Discord. And so I'll go ahead and just throw up a video relating to that and kind of just go from there and that sort of stuff. So a lot of the stuff's not hard stuff, but it can be kind of confusing stuff, to say the least. Just don't overstress yourself. And Core is literally just the demo version without all the polishing. It doesn't have all the effects and everything. If we pulled up our characters and all that stuff, the animators are basically empty, and that's pretty much the sum of it. So I could click on this, open it up, and it's literally the exact same animator as the demo. The difference is there's no animations assigned. So if you come into Core and you try to, for example, jump into combat, or combat idle, or swinging a sword, or mounting the dragons, well, none of these animations exist in Core. Core has very, very, very few defined. It's still got the same kind of structure, but most of the motions are just non-existent. So that's where you'll run into your problems. If, for example, you start running in Core and you start jumping ahead and you start noticing, for example, your characters just dropping into the ground and then standing back up, they're not doing anything. That's because these are not set. And these are basically nothing more than just dragging them into place. So I have all my thousands and thousands of animation systems here. You just literally drag them in place where you need them and go from there. Some of these assets are paid for. This one I can't remember if I paid for that one or not. I know it's a very good one. I do like that one. Let's wait for this and I'll see. So I've got several animation systems. Some are better than others. This one was a free one. You know, one of the versions was free. I guess now it's $18. This is the one that we'll be doing for a lot of our implementations. It includes a lot of the general stuff and nothing extravagant with it, but it works with basically all the characters and all the stuff, and you're literally just dragging their animation file in, and it works with virtually any of the same humanoid characters. They're not hard. Don't let the animation system make you think it's going to be hard. Yeah, that one there. So we're looking for the explosive LLC crafting ones. Was his free? Because I know I got a couple on here that were completely free. That one was another kind of expensive one. Yeah, I got some in here that are free. I just can't remember which ones. I'll have to go through here. I don't want you thinking you gotta pay for any of them. I will try to pull up some of the free ones, but you can also just get in there and look at them under the asset store and just look for animations. And some of these are free, some of these are paid. You're kind of just looking around for whatever's, well, in your budget. But if you're looking for the free stuff, there's 321 of them listed here. Nothing high tech or fancy, but hey, there's plenty of free ones out there too. So this one here's got 32 animations. It doesn't cost you anything. You got your zombie animations and yada yada yada. So don't think that you have to come through here and spend a bunch of money for it just because the demo doesn't kind of give you the same stuff as the core version does. A lot of this stuff is free assets. I just use some of the ones from people I'm more familiar with and whatnot. But yeah, that's all the fun stuff with it. So I'm going to put this video up on the YouTube channel as well. And I don't know if I'm going to continue streaming any of this, just because, I mean, literally nobody stops by the streams to watch them. And then I'm constantly just trying to watch the chat when there's nobody actually there. I'm just trying to basically make tutorials. I don't get paid to do any of this stuff. I'm not sponsored from anybody, and this is just basically broadcasting for nothing at the moment. So I'll probably just stop uploading or streaming on Twitch, and I will likely just start uploading it directly to YouTube. So just hop on the YouTube channel and pick up most of the videos. If they're not streamed, they're just straight uploaded there. Sometimes I'll upload, but it's like right now it's 9:30 at night here. Not too many people that I know are still awake. Most people are saying they're already sleeping, which like I said earlier, I'm recovering from I got hit really bad with a cold, really bad, really quick. And I basically was zonked out for like 2 days. I couldn't even get out of bed. And I still just not really feeling all that good. So I don't know when I'm going to make the next video. I'm going to try to do it tomorrow, but we'll just kind of see how it goes and go from there. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. Don't have too much fun. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And enjoy.